The Shenzhen Hall could hold 300 people. That day, it was packed. Everyone had come to watch the engagement ceremony. No one was planning to attend the wedding. Lei Kairan was kneeling in the center of the hall on a red stone. The stone was wet from the morning rain, and the cold seeped into his bones. He had the taste of blood in his mouth. He didn't remember how he had gotten into this position. He didn't remember this hall. He didn't recognize a single face around him. His body remembered everything. The names came to him on their own. They surfaced like lines in someone else's ledger that he'd opened in the middle of a page. The woman by the eastern column is the bride's aunt. The fat man in green is the manager of the Sheng trading courtyard. The young man in white on the dais is Wei Jiansu, the heir to the Wei clan. At the sight of him, his body bowed its head of its own accord. Chiron watched this from the sidelines and didn't understand. His body was afraid. He wasn't afraid. He simply didn't know the rules of this place yet. He learned the first rule within 10 heartbeats. The guests were laughing before anything had even happened. That meant they knew the ending. That meant the outcome had been decided before he even got down on one knee. The doors at the back of the hall swung open. Shen Mei Lin stepped out. She wore a dress the color of young tea with silver thread along the hem. In her hands, she held half of a jade lock. The other half hung around Chiron's neck on a coarse cord. She didn't look at him even once. She looked over his head toward where her father was sitting. That was worse than any look. Chiron realized it immediately. That's not how you look at a person. That's how you look at a stain that's about to be wiped away. She began to speak, and the hall fell silent. She said that the Shen clan was annulling the marriage contract concluded 9 years ago. She said that the Lei family had ceased to exist 3 years ago, along with his father. She said she would not become the wife of a man who had neither a name, nor a household, nor a single coin to his name. She said the clan should not have to pay for the mistakes of the dead. The steward nodded. He unrolled the scroll and read aloud the inventory of gifts. 12 pieces of silk, 4 measures of grain, 1 jug of oil. All of this had been sent by the Lei clan over the course of 9 years. The steward said that the Shang clan was returning these gifts in full and demanded that the hall be cleared. Chiron stared at his hands. His palms were covered in calluses and old cuts. His fingernails were torn off. These weren't his hands. They were the hands of someone who had carried other people's sacks for 9 years just to send 4 measures of grain here. Myrene approached the dais and placed half a piece of jade into Wei Jiansu's palm. The hall exhaled. Someone clapped. Then everyone clapped. Wei Jiansu raised the jade above his head and turned it so that the light fell on the chip. He said that the Wei clan accepted the agreement and that the wedding would take place in 40 days. He said he held no grudge against the beggar. He said he was willing to pay him 1 silver coin for the trouble. The coin fell onto the stone 2 steps away from Chiron's knees. It spun for a long time. 300 people listened as it spun. Then it came to rest. His body wanted to scream. Chiron didn't let it scream. He clenched his knees and didn't look away. In his past life, he had seen many broken contracts. People always screamed. Screaming never changed a single line in any contract. He knew that for certain. He didn't remember where he'd learned it. And at that moment, a white line hung before his eyes. It was as thin as a scratch on glass and hung in the air where no one but him was looking. The line unfolded. The register is open. Entry 1. A broken promise made by Shun Mei Lin, given 9 years ago, broken in front of 300 witnesses. Penalty assessed. Strength +2. Wisdom +2. Luck +1. Chiron stopped breathing. Not out of fear. It was recognition. He'd seen this layout before. On the left, the obligation. On the right, the fulfillment. Below, the signature and the number of witnesses. He used to read sheets like this every day, 40 sheets a day, in another life and in another city that didn't exist in this world. Then his body grew hot. The pain in his split lip subsided. The ringing in his ears vanished. He felt his shoulders as he had never felt them before, as if someone had poured water into an empty jug. The line faded away. In its place remained a second line. It was gray, and it did not fade. The register resembled the terms and conditions. Payment is due only for a promise made to him personally. The line closes the moment a promise is broken in public. The reward increases based on the number of witnesses and the standing of the one who made the promise. And the final condition glowed brighter than the rest. If he strikes back before the line closes, the line goes out and pays nothing. Chiron tested this immediately. He looked at the coin on the floor and imagined picking it up and throwing it at the pale face of the heir, Wei. The register dimmed. The gray letters flickered like a flame in a draft. He let the thought go. The register stabilized. So it's true. So rage costs money. So patience is the coin. He rose from his knees, slowly. The steward stepped forward to have him escorted out. Chiron raised his hand and asked to speak. The hall laughed again. A beggar asking to speak. Father Myrene waved his finger lazily. Let him speak. This will be amusing. Chiron did not speak of honor. He turned to the old scribe sitting to the side at a low table, recording the ceremony. The scribe's name was Mo Gan. His body knew that name too. Chiron said he was requesting that the annulment be entered into the clan registry in full form, with the number of witnesses, with the name of the one who refused, with the house's seal. Mo Gang raised his eyebrows. He said they didn't issue extracts to beggars. Chiron said he wasn't asking for a certificate. He said he was asking for an entry. He said that the Sheng house had been keeping records for 200 years and that the entry cost the house nothing. Myrene's father shrugged and gave his permission. It pleased him. He decided the boy was begging for a pitiful scrap of paper so he could weep over it in his ditch. Mo Gung picked up the brush. He wrote the first line and stopped. He said he didn't like the wording of the refusal. Chiron recited the wording to him. He repeated it word for word. Refusal due to non-compliance with regulations through no fault of the other party. Exactly, through no fault of the other party. Mo Gung looked up and gazed at him for the first time that morning. Chiron himself didn't understand where those words had come from. They came from that life where he would sit down at his desk every morning and break down other people's debts into their constituent parts. He knew that the 3 words at the end of the line were worth more than the entire contract. Once again, he couldn't remember who he was. He remembered only his hands on the paper and the smell of ink. Mo Gung finished writing the line. Then Chiron turned to Myrene. He said that since the other party was not at fault, he had one request. He asked her to promise in front of everyone that the Shen household would never again set foot in the Lei household's courtyard, and that his father's ledger would be returned to him within 30 days. The room burst into laughter. The manager wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Wei Jiansu shook his head like a man who'd been shown a sick dog. Myrene finally looked at him. She said she promised. She said she promised in front of everyone, and gladly. She said she was ready to promise anything, just so she'd never have to see his face again. 300 people heard her. 300 people laughed. A new line appeared before Chiron's eyes. It wasn't white. It was gold around the edges. The registry opened the second entry. Promiser, Sheng Myrene. Made before 300 witnesses. Term, 30 days. The line was open, and immediately beneath it, a warning lit up. As long as the line is open, it drains some of his strength. Chiron felt it in a single breath. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. A chill ran down his spine like icy water down his collar. He staggered and steadied himself against a column. The guests decided that the beggar had finally broken down. That's how it should be. That's how it's meant to be. They led him out through the backyard, past the kitchen pits and the ash pit. At the back gate stood the gatekeeper with his bundle. Inside the bundle lay an old jacket and 3 copper coins. The gatekeeper said he would hand over the bundle at the gate. Chiron said he trusted him. The register quietly opened the 3rd entry. Right at the gate, the gatekeeper shook the coins into his palm and tossed the empty jacket into the mud. He said this was payment for not having the boy beaten with sticks. The entry closed. Retribution was recorded. Strength +1. Luck +1. 2 witnesses. Chiron picked up the jacket and shook it out. He didn't say a word. He looked at the gatekeeper and did the math. 3 copper coins were worth 1 entry. 1 entry was worth 1 point of strength. So the price of his humiliation now had a value. Everything in this world has a price. He walked out through the gate and down the street toward the lower quarter. The road led downhill past the fish stalls and the salt shops. It smelled of mud and burnt oil. People already knew. Rumors in this city traveled faster than a man. A woman standing by the baskets of eels pointed at him. A bunch of boys ran after him, shouting about Jade. He didn't turn around. He was checking the body. Halfway up the hill stood a cart with a barrel of water. The cart driver was exhausted and asked for help. Yesterday, this body wouldn't have been able to lift such a barrel. Chiron grabbed the lower rim and set the barrel on the cart by himself. The cart driver took a step back. He looked at the skinny boy in the wet jacket. He said he'd seen this guy knocked off his feet by an empty sack 3 days ago. Chiron didn't say anything. He kept walking. His hands were trembling, but they trembled with newfound strength, not weakness. His father's house stood at the end of Crooked Alley. Half the roof had caved in back in the winter. Weeds taller than his waist grew in the yard. A debt collection seal hung on the door. Chiron tore off the seal and went inside. It was empty. They'd taken everything, including the floorboards. He sat down on the threshold. The open golden line drew strength steadily and unceasingly, like a leak in a boat. He understood the main point. The register wasn't a gift. The register was a bill. First, he pays with himself. Then, he gets paid. And the larger the debt, the longer he'll have to pay first. Behind him, the gate creaked. Mo Gung entered the courtyard. The old man was carrying his box of brushes under his arm and was clearly displeased with himself. He said he was just passing by. He said the paper the boy had asked for was worthless. He said that no court in the city would accept a claim against the Shung clan. He said the boy had begged for a piece of junk and lost the last thing he had. Chiron asked him about Article 31 of the City Registry Statutes. Mo Gung fell silent. Chiron told him that under this article, any entry made in the clan registry in the presence of witnesses is considered a binding obligation of the house. He said the court had nothing to do with it. He said the Shun house trades with 8 guilds and that all 8 consult the clan registries before a transaction. He said the document wasn't needed for court. It was needed for the market. Mo Gung set the box down on the ground. He looked at the barefoot boy in a wet jacket sitting on the threshold of the ruined house. The old man's expression changed. He said that in 40 years of service, he had heard this article cited 3 times. He said that all 3 times it had been recited by gray-haired men in silk. He asked who had taught him this. Chiron said his father had taught him. It was a lie. The truth was shorter and not meant for strangers' ears. The truth was that he remembered a table with an inkwell, a line of people at the door, and his own voice explaining to someone every day that the 3 words at the end of the line were worth more than any contract. Mogung left at dusk. He didn't promise anything. Chiron noted this separately. The old man was the only one all day who hadn't made a single promise to him. That meant the old man was dangerous, and that meant the old man was honest. It rained that night. Water seeped through a hole in the roof onto the dirt floor. Chiron sat against the wall and stared at the gray line in the ledger. 30 days. He counted differently. He didn't count days, but people. The Shun clan, the Wei clan, the manager of the trading courtyard, the gatekeeper at the back gate, the guests who laughed. Each of them knew how to make promises. Each of them broke them without a second thought. All his life, this had been his curse. Today, it had become his gold mine. He needed promises, lots of promises. The city was full of people who handed them out for free. By morning, the entire lower quarter knew about the beggar who had asked for paper instead of money. By noon, the Wei clan knew about it. And one man in that clan did not laugh. He asked only one thing. He asked what exact formula for refusal the boy had dictated to the scribe. They told him the formula. He was silent for a long time. Then he ordered them to find the house on Krivoy Lane. It had rained all night, and by dawn, the earthen floor of the house had turned into a liquid mush. Chiron hadn't slept. He sat against the wall, holding in his palm an empty knot that had once held 3 copper coins. The exposed golden line drained his strength just as a leak drains the bottom of a vessel. By morning, he understood how this differed from hunger. Hunger takes from the stomach. The line took from his hands. His fingers wouldn't obey him. He tried 3 times to tie the cord on his jacket and gave up 3 times. He memorized this as a number. 1 large open line cost him about 1/3 of his body. That meant he wouldn't be able to keep 3 such lines open. That meant he had to take big promises one at a time. Small ones could be taken in bunches. He tested this at dawn by the well. The water carrier from Krivoy Lane had promised to give him a bucket of water on credit. The line opened and barely pulled at all. The water carrier kept his promise, and the line simply closed without payment. The registry didn't pay for honesty. The register paid only for deception. That was important. He noted this in his mind as a separate entry and headed back. There were 4 people at the gate to his courtyard. 3 were standing, 1 was sitting on a horse. The one sitting on the horse identified himself as a representative of the Dongpao debt court. He unfolded the receipt and began to read. The Lei clan's debt amounted to 80 silver coins. 3 years' interest added another 40. The total was 120. The house was worth 30 at best. The land beneath the house was worth another 20. That left 70, and those 70 hung over the last surviving member of the clan. Chiron listened calmly. He wasn't looking at the horseman, but at the receipt. The seal was crooked. The number had been written in a different ink. In his past life, he'd spot things like that at a glance and been paid for it. He didn't say a word about it. It wasn't the right time. The horseman stated the condition. If the boy worked 20 days at the Ridge Quarry, the debt would be written off in full. This was ordered by Dun Pao himself, out of the goodness of his heart. Chiron asked if the man personally promised this. The horseman laughed and said he did. He said it loudly, in front of his 3 men. The registrar opened the ledger to a new entry. The entry wasn't gold, but red along the edge. 4 witnesses, 20 days. Chiron agreed and walked after his horse. He walked and counted. He knew the debt would not be written off. He knew this as surely as one knows that water is wet. Such receipts aren't written to be settled. Such receipts are written so that a man will work for free and die before the deadline. He walked toward the quarry knowing this in advance. He was going there precisely for that reason. The ridge quarry lay a 2-hour walk to the north, a gray gash in the hillside. Dust rose in a column and wouldn't settle even after rain. The foreman's name was Ho Ran. He was broad-shouldered and missing one eyebrow. He looked at the newcomer and said he'd be dead by the 3rd day. He didn't mean it maliciously. He said it like a man counting sacks. He said that in 9 years, 40 like him had died there, and that all 40 had looked tougher. The first few days were hell. The open red line drained his strength along with the gold line. 2 open lines at once, it was just too much. Kyron lifted a basket of crushed stone and couldn't get it off the ground. He fell. They kicked him in the side and he got back up. By the end of the 3rd day, he fully understood how it worked. The register didn't give strength in advance. The register took it away first and gave it back later. It wasn't a reward. It was a reverse loan. First, the interest. Then, the body. On the 4th day, he stopped fighting it and started counting. He counted how many baskets a person lifted per shift. He counted how many people were at the open pit mine. He counted how many of them had made him even a single promise. The work went on, and the days blurred into one. The first cut. His palms cracked, so he wrapped them in strips from his sleeve and continued carrying the stone. The second cut. On the 9th day, he managed to lift a basket using only his back and realized that the golden thread wasn't pulling as hard anymore because his body had grown stronger under the strain. Third cut. On the 15th day, he was carrying the basket when Ho Ran walked by, and Ho Ran stopped. He didn't say anything. He just stopped. Fourth cut. On the 18th day, Kyron lifted the stone that they had previously rolled together, and the entire cutting site fell silent. People stopped working and watched. Ho Ran stood higher up on a ledge, holding a sack of salt in his hand, and didn't notice when the sack came untied and the salt spilled onto his boot. The reaction was more important than the stone. Kyron understood this. He deliberately placed the stone on the edge so that all 26 people could see it. Witnesses mean future money. That evening, 2 men came over to him. They asked if it was true that he'd been promised his debt would be written off in 20 days. He replied that it was true. They said they'd been promised the same thing 2 years ago. They said the deadline kept getting pushed back every time. Kyron asked them if anyone had promised them this in front of witnesses. One said the foreman had promised it in front of the entire shift. Kyron remembered that too. He lay down on the straw and stared at the holy canopy. The ledger hung before his eyes. A red line. The 18th day. He could leave right now. He could simply not show up on the 20th. Then the promise wouldn't be broken and there would be no payment. He needed to be deceived. He needed to be deceived in full view of everyone. He got up on the morning of the 20th and went not to the mine, but to the office. He arrived there just as the entire shift had gathered at the scales, 26 people. He asked the foreman, in front of everyone, to confirm that today was the 20th day and that the debt had been written off. Ho Ran looked at him as if he were a talking insect. He said that 20 days meant 20 full shifts and that the boy had slacked off for 3 shifts, wallowing in the dust, which meant he'd worked 17. He said that the term was now 30 days. He said that Dong Pao had decided so. He said it loudly so that everyone could hear. He always did that. He'd been doing it for 9 years, and it always worked. People lowered their eyes. The ledger flashed. The line closed. A broken promise. 26 witnesses. The severity of the promise? 2nd level. Retribution calculated. Strength +6. Mind +4. Luck +3. His body took it like a blast of boiling water from within. Kyron stood there and felt his shoulders straighten. How everything became sharp before his eyes. how the dust stopped making it hard to breathe. He didn't lunge at the foreman. He thanked him, out loud and calmly. He said he understood and that he would work out the 30. Ho Ran was taken aback. He'd been expecting a scream. He knew how to beat those who scream. He didn't know how to beat those who thank him. Kyron worked through the rest of the day. That night, he left the quarry and was in town by dawn. He didn't go to Dongpao. He went to the city registration office. Mo Gung had been sitting there since 6 in the morning because the old man hadn't slept well. Kyron placed a sheet of paper in front of him. On the sheet were 26 names. Next to each name was a date and a single promise that Foreman Ho Ran had made to these people on behalf of the debt court. Debt forgiveness in exchange for labor. Mo Gung read it for a long time. Then he said the boy was crazy. He said that not even the guilds in this city would go against Dongpao. Kyron said he wasn't going against Dongpao. He said he was challenging a single clause. He named it. A promise to write off a debt made by an office representative in the presence of witnesses is equivalent to a change in the terms of the promissory note. He said that if the terms had been changed 26 times, the promissory notes would have to be recertified. He said that recertification cost the office 2 coins per sheet. He said that 26 sheets amounts to 52 coins, plus a late fee. He said this wouldn't ruin Dongpao. He said it would make him angry. Mo Gung set down his brush. He asked why one would anger a man who could kill. Kyron said that an angry man makes better promises. The old man didn't understand. Kyron didn't bother to explain. 2 days later, a letter from the local government arrived at the debt collection office. 3 days later, Dongpao himself arrived at the quarry. He was a small, neat man dressed in dark clothes, and he spoke softly. He summoned the foreman and relieved him of his shift in front of everyone. He said that Ho Ran had been talking too much for 9 years and that now the office was paying for his loose tongue. Ho Ran was thrown out the gate without pay. Kyron stood at the end of the line and watched. He hadn't laid a finger on that man even once. Not even a finger. The people who had beaten Ho Ran were the same 26. That evening, the former foreman sat by the road in the dust, clutching his ribs. Kyron walked over and sat down beside him. He asked if the man remembered his words about the 3rd day. Ho Ran raised his head. He looked at the boy whom, 20 days earlier, he had knocked down with one hand. He saw different shoulders and different eyes. He said he didn't understand how. He said that in 9 years, he'd seen it all. He said he'd never seen anything like this. Kyron told him it was simple. He said that every time the foreman broke his word, he paid not the workers, but him. Ho Ran didn't believe it, but his expression had already changed. Dongpao sent for Kyron the next morning. The conversation was brief. The small man in black asked what the boy wanted. Kyron said he wanted his father's receipt. Dongpao said the receipt was worth 70 coins. Kyron said it was worth less because the seal was crooked and the number was written in different ink. Dongpao was silent for a long time. Then he laughed. He said he liked the boy. He said he'd forgive him 20 coins and that he expected the remaining 50 in 2 months. He said he promised not to touch the house on Crooked Alley for those 2 months. He said this in the presence of his manager and 2 guards. The registrar opened a new line in the ledger. Kyron bowed and left. He knew that Dongpao had lied. Dongpao lied professionally and elegantly and charged a high price for it. It was the best news of the week. They were waiting for him on the street. There were 2 of them, dressed in gray with silver thread on the collar, the colors of the Sheng house. The manager of the trading courtyard stood slightly to the side, pretending to examine a salt stall. He approached Kyron himself. He said that the Shang clan was willing to pay for a service. He said that the entry in the clans had been made in haste and that the house wished to correct it. He said that in exchange for the boy's signature, the house would pay 40 silver coins. Chiron looked at him and realized he had been right from start to finish. The paper was worth more than jade. He asked how many days remained until the end of the 30-day period. The manager replied that there were 9. Chiron said he would take 9 days to think it over. The manager smiled and said that the Shen house knew how to wait. He said that in 9 days, the offer would still stand. He promised as much. The ledger opened to the 3rd line. Chiron didn't go home right away. He turned into an alley behind the salt shop, and there he was bent in half. 3 open lines at once. The gold one from Myrene, a red one from Dong Pao, a gray one from Manager Sheng. Each pulled him in evenly and without ceasing. Spots danced before his eyes, and for a few heartbeats, the world grew flat and gray like wet paper. He sat down right in the mud by the wall and stayed there until he could count again. Then he counted. He figured out the most important thing. The registry didn't charge everyone equally. It charged in proportion to the future reward. Myrene's promise, made before 300 witnesses, carried more weight than everything else combined. He pieced together a simple fact in his mind. The more important the person he was waiting for, the weaker he himself was at that moment. That meant the system was working against him right up until the moment of reckoning. That meant for the remaining 9 days, he would be at his weakest for the entire month. And it was during those very 9 days that the whole city learned of him. He reached Crooked Alley by nightfall. A small fire was burning in the courtyard. A man was sitting by the fire, warming his hands. His left sleeve was missing below the elbow. He introduced himself as Sen Ro and said he had served for 12 years in the outer guard at the west gate. He said he'd heard about the boy who'd taken down the foreman from the ridge without laying a finger on him. He said he'd come to take a look at the fool before he died. Chiron sat down across from him. He asked what the one-armed man wanted. Sen Ro answered honestly. He said he wanted to eat. He said there was no work for a cripple and that in the past 6 months he'd sunk so low that he was warming himself in someone else's courtyard. Chiron asked if he knew how to teach. Senro laughed and said he'd been training recruits for 9 years. Chiron said he'd give him shelter and food. He said that in return, he wanted the man to teach him how to stand on his own 2 feet. Senro surveyed the courtyard with its collapsed roof and waist-high weeds and asked what kind of food they served here. Chiron said there was no food yet. The one-armed man stared at him for a long time. Then he said he promised to teach him until the first snowfall. He said this quietly and without witnesses, and yet the register opened a line. A thin, pale one. Chiron looked at that line and, for the first time, felt something resembling shame. The line meant one thing. The register expected this man to betray him. The register always expected that from everyone, and the register had never been wrong. Not even once. Training began at dawn and turned out to be worse than the quarry. Senro didn't let him land a single blow on the first day. He put him in a standing position and made him stand there. Chiron stood for a quarter of an hour and then collapsed. The one-armed man said that now it was clear. He said the boy had the arms of a hammerer and the legs of a drowned man. He said he'd seen that in people who hauled stone and had never fought. He said that strength without support was like a sack of flour. A sack of flour is heavy. A sack of flour has never defeated anyone. This was the first real wall. Chiron tested it himself on the second day. He went to the western gate, where people from the Wei household were standing, and there the youngest guard shoved him with his shoulder. Chiron now weighed more and was stronger than any dock worker at the pier. He lost his balance. He didn't understand how it happened. The guard didn't even hit him. He simply turned his body. Chiron got up from the dust amid the laughter of 3 men in the way colors and didn't earn a single point for that laughter. The registrar remained silent. Mockery without a promise was worth nothing. He made a note of that too. An insult only carries weight when it's backed by a broken promise. Back home, he told this to Senro. The one-armed man listened and said the boy was asking the right questions. He said that the guards put a newcomer in the stance for 3 months precisely because strength comes quickly, but the foundation comes slowly. He said they didn't have 3 months. He asked how much time they had. Chiron said 7 days. Senro spat and said that it would hurt then. What followed was a month that blurred into one long day. First scene. Chiron stood in the stance on the slippery rocks by the river until the water rose above his knees, holding a log on his shoulders. Second scene. He ran up the slope of the ridge carrying 2 baskets of crushed stone, and the one-armed man walked beside him, not letting him lower his head. Third scene. He slept for 3 hours at a time and kept track of everything in an old book he'd found under a floorboard, where he wrote down every promise he'd been given in the city. Fourth scene. By the end of the 2nd week, he had knocked Senro into the mud, and the one-armed man sat down and was silent for a long time. Then he said that he had been teaching for 9 years, and that in those 9 years he had never seen a person grow like that. He said it wasn't right. He said things didn't happen that way. He looked at the boy differently than he had on the first evening, and no longer called him a fool. But 7 days had passed before that. On the 6th day of the 9, people arrived at Crooked Alley. There were 5 of them, and they were not from the Shin household. They were dressed in white with blue cords, the colors of the Wei clan. The eldest among them did not give his name. He placed a purse on the threshold and said that the Wei clan was also interested in an entry in the Shin registry. He said the wedding was in 40 days and that the Wei household didn't want an open entry in someone else's book on the eve of the union. He said he was willing to pay 60 coins. He said that if there was no paper, there would be no deal. He promised that after the transaction, the Wei clan would forget Lei's name forever. The registry opened the 4th entry. Chiron stood in the doorway, holding onto the doorframe, because 4 open entries were more than he could bear. He refused. He said he would think about it after the deadline. The elder in white nodded and left without argument. That was bad. People who leave without a fight come back with fire. Senro said the same thing in almost the same words. He said he'd seen such visits for 12 years and that after them, houses burned down on the 3rd night. He asked why the boy had turned down 60 coins when Dongpao's debt was 50. Chiron couldn't explain the truth to him. He only said that the paper wasn't for sale. That night, he sat with his father's book and did the calculations. It was hard work. The 4 open lines drained him so much that his brush slipped from his fingers. And that was when he understood the second half of the mechanism. He opened the book in the middle and saw his father's handwriting. His father kept meticulous and careful records and wrote the same line at the bottom of every page. A word is worth as much as the one who gave it. Chiron looked at that line and realized that the ledger wasn't a random gift. The ledger was structured like an account book, exactly the same way. On the left, the obligation. On the right, the fulfillment. At the bottom, the number of witnesses. He didn't remember his own death. He only remembered that on his last day, he had refused to write someone else's lie in a book just like this one. And that after that, no one had defended him. The thought came and went. He didn't hold on to it. On the 8th day, he made his move. He hung a sign on the door of his house and wrote on it that contracts were drawn up here for a single copper coin. No one came in the morning. By noon, a woman from the fish market arrived. Her neighbor had been promising to return her net for 3 years. By evening, 4 people had come. The next day, 19 people came. The lower quarter lived on promises because paper was expensive and a word cost nothing. Every other person here had been deceived, and every other person had deceived others themselves. Chiron wrote simple sheets of paper for them. Who promised, what they promised, when, and most importantly, who was standing right there with them. He didn't take a single copper coin beyond the coin itself for this. He wasn't collecting money. He was gathering witnesses. Senro looked at the line at the door and said he now understood why the boy had refused the Wei clan. He was wrong about the reason. Chiron didn't correct him. The 9th day began quietly. The 30-day deadline for Shun Mei-rin's promise was set to expire at sunset. Chiron didn't go anywhere. He sat in the courtyard, waiting, feeling as weak as a child. His father's ledger hadn't arrived, neither in the morning nor in the afternoon. By evening, the manager of the Shun trading courtyard entered the courtyard. He was polite. He said that the Shun household had resolved the matter differently. He said that the Lei family's ledger had been sold to a third party the day before yesterday, and that the household could not return what it no longer possessed. He said that this was not a breach, but a circumstance. He said that the offer of 40 coins was cancelled because the entry was now worthless. He turned and walked toward the gate. The register flashed gold across the entire courtyard. The entry was closed. A broken promise. The promisor, Shun Mei-lin. 300 witnesses to the promise. The promisor's severity, 4th degree. Retribution calculated. Strength plus 19. Intelligence plus 14. Luck plus 11. Chiron fell to his knees in the weeds. It wasn't a blast of boiling water. It was as if a river had been poured into him. His bones hummed. He heard the manager's footsteps behind the fence, heard his breathing, and heard a pebble crunch under his boot 20 paces away. He raised his hand and looked at it. His hand wasn't trembling. For the first time in 30 days, his body was entirely his own. Senro dropped the canteen. He looked at the man sitting in the weeds and saw something he couldn't explain with a single word from his 12 years of service. The ledger hadn't been closed. Beneath the closed line, a new one had unfolded. The first major payment had been accepted. The second level had been unlocked. Chiron read the condition twice. Now he could see others' unfulfilled promises. Not his own. Others. He looked up toward the fence, and hanging above the departing manager of the trading yard were 4 thin lines. 4 words that this man had given to someone and had not yet kept. Chiron looked at them and realized that the city had just become transparent. And then the smell of smoke drifted in from the south. It wasn't burning in his courtyard. A plank, a door, and the entire front wall of the house were ablaze. 5 men in white with blue cords stood in the street, waiting for him to come out. The eldest held a torch and took his time. He shouted across the fire that the Wei clan had decided to do without the paper. He shouted that the boy should have taken 60 coins when they were offered. And an open line hung above his head. Chiron saw it perfectly clearly. He had promised someone to bring the debtor's head. Not to destroy the house. Not to burn the paper. To bring the head. The fire was creeping up the front wall, and the board with the inscription about contracts for 1 copper coin was the first to burn. Chiron stood in the doorway and looked at the 5 of them. He didn't see people. He saw 4 lines. One hung over the eldest, and it was thick and dark. One thin line hung over each of the other 2. Nothing hung over the 4th. The 5th stood slightly behind the others, and the line above him was strange. It was torn in the middle. Chiron didn't know what that meant. He put the question aside for later. Senro came around the corner with a fence stake in his only hand and stood to the side. He said there were 5 of them and that 3 had swords. He said they had to leave through the vegetable garden. He said this in the even voice of a man who had been calculating odds at the gate for 12 years. Chiron didn't move. He thought about the rule. The register voids the reward if he strikes back before the line closes. There wasn't a single line on him right now. All four hung over strangers' heads, and they were strangers' promises to strangers. So there was no prohibition. So for the first time in 30 days, he could just strike. The elder raised his torch higher and shouted through the flames that the boy should have taken the 60 coins when they were offered. He shouted that now the paper would burn along with the house. He stepped through the gate. Chiron walked toward him across the courtyard, moving quickly. His body felt different than it had a week ago. The ground held him steady. His shoulders held firm. His head was cold and empty, like a washed-out bowl. The elder struck down from above with the torch. Chiron took the blow with his forearm and felt the heat but no pain. He grabbed the man by the wrist and twisted it. The bone made a sound he'd never heard before. The torch fell into the weeds. A second man came from the right with a sword, and Senro knocked his knee out with a stake and knocked him face down onto the ground. A third man swung at him, and Chiron grabbed him by the chest of his garment and lifted him up. He lifted the man in leather armor with one hand. He did it without thinking. He held him aloft and looked him in the face, and the man in white stopped breathing. Chiron set him down on the ground and shoved him. The man flew 4 paces and fell into a pile of ashes. The fourth man dropped his sword of his own accord. The fifth did not run. He stood and stared at the torn-out line above his head as if he could feel it. It all took less than 20 heartbeats. Meanwhile, the fire had spread to the roof. Chiron grabbed a trough and ran to the well. He poured out 4 buckets and realized he wouldn't make it in time. Then he did what they do when there's a fire in the lower quarter. He climbed onto the roof and began tearing it apart with his bare hands. He ripped out the burning boards and tossed them down into the courtyard. He tore apart the rafters where the fire hadn't reached yet and split the roof in 2 to keep the flames from spreading further. Neighbors came out onto the street. At first, there were 5 of them, then 20, then the entire Krivoy alley and half the fish market. They stood and looked up. They saw a skinny boy who, a month ago, had been beaten senseless with an empty sack and who was now tearing apart the burning roof with his bare hands and snapping beams like kindling. No one came to help. Everyone just watched. By midnight, the fire had consumed the front wall and half the roof and stopped. The house stood. Chiron sat down on the ground in the middle of the courtyard, covered in soot and with his hands scorched. Reister was silent. He hadn't paid a thing. Not a single unit. Chiron understood this and remembered it as the defining number of the night. Reister doesn't pay for victory. The registry pays only for betrayal. Victory came for free, and from that day on, he knew he'd have to earn his keep differently. In the morning, an old man named Gu Baisheng came into the courtyard. He had been the elder of the alley for 31 years and had buried more people here than he could remember by face. He said bluntly, in front of everyone, that the boy had brought the Wei clan down on the alley. He said that everything here would burn to the ground in a single night if that son of Lei didn't get out. He said the house had to be torn down and the land handed over to the debt collection yard. He said he wasn't saying this out of malice. He said he was simply counting coffins. The people remained silent and stood behind him. Chiron didn't argue. He asked the old man one thing. He asked how many times in 31 years the people of the Wei clan had come into this alley. The old man said, not once. Chiron asked why. The old man said there was nothing to take here. Chiron said that now there was. He said that yesterday, 5 men had come here for one person and had left on their own 2 feet only because he'd let them. He said that if he'd left through the vegetable garden, they would have broken down every other door in their search. He said there were 40 doors here and that all 40 were still intact. Gu Baisheng remained silent. He went to inspect the house. He saw the roof torn in two and a beam as thick as 2 hands torn from its socket. He saw a pile of charred planks stacked neatly one on top of the other. He touched the broken rafters and counted them. Then he returned to the courtyard, sat down on a rock, and said nothing for a long time. Then he said that in 31 years he had seen 14 fires. He said that in all 14, the house had burned to the ground because no one had torn off the roof. He said that tearing off the roof is taught only in the palace fire brigade and that there are no such people in the lower quarter. He asked who had taught the boy. Chiron didn't answer. He didn't know himself. He only knew that his hands had done it on their own and that somewhere in another life he had read an analysis of one major fire 30 times and explained aloud why it had burned down exactly that way. He didn't remember the city or why he had read it. He only remembered the conclusion. It's not water that saves a house. It's the gap that saves it. By evening, Gu Baisheng had brought 4 men with planks. He said the alley would have the wall repaired in 2 days. He said he didn't trust the boy, but would fix it anyway. He said that if the boy went up against 5 of them alone one more time, the alley would stand by his side. He didn't promise that. He phrased it exactly that way so as not to make a promise. Chiron noticed this and realized that the old man was smarter than he'd seemed that morning. 8 days passed, and they all blurred into one. First cut. The wall was rebuilt, and on the new board, Chiron wrote not about contracts, but about keeping track of promises, and the price became 2 coins per sheet. Second cut. The line at the gate stretched from morning until dark, and Sen Ro sat at the entrance, letting people in one at a time. Third cut. Chiron stopped sleeping at night because he saw lines above everyone who entered the courtyard, and he had to record them separately. Fourth scene. By the 9th day, the book contained 412 promises from strangers with names and deadlines, and half of them had been made by people from the upper city. He realized something simple then. He held in his hands a map of all the city's unkept promises. No clan had a map like this. The clan knew what was owed to it. The clan didn't know what it owed to everyone else. People came to him because the fee was 2 coins, not 40 as it was at City Hall. People told him everything because they tell everything to the man who writes the contract. And a line hung over each of them, and he saw it before the person even opened their mouth. Senro looked at the line of people and at the book, and one evening he asked point blank. He asked why the boy needed other people's debts if he couldn't collect them. Chiron said he had no intention of collecting them. He said he just wanted to know. The one-armed man shook his head and said he didn't understand. Then he said that there had been a sergeant in the guard who also wrote everything down, and that this sergeant had risen to become the gate commander and outlived 3 commandants. He said he hadn't understood it back then either. On the 10th day, a man dressed in dark clothes entered the courtyard. It was Dong Pao. He had come on his own and without an escort, and that meant more than any escort could. He looked at the line of people. He looked at the new wall. He sat down on a rock by the well and said he hadn't come for the money. He said that the debt collection yard had existed for 140 years and that in all that time, no one had ever taken his work away from him. He said that in 9 days, the boy had written more contracts than the office did in a year. He said that this was a war and that the boy hadn't noticed it. Chiron looked at him and saw 2 lines above his head. One was old and almost transparent. The second was fresh and bold, and it contained a name. Chiron read the name and said nothing aloud. Wei Tsung-min. Dong Pao had promised something to a man named Wei Tsung-min, and he had promised it recently. Meanwhile, Dong Pao continued speaking. He said he was offering an alliance. He said the office would hire the boy as a court scribe with a salary of 8 coins and that the debt of 50 coins would be written off that very day. He said he was promising this on his word, in the presence of his manager. The manager was standing by the gate and heard everything. The ledger opened a new entry. Chiron refused. He declined politely and said he would think it over for 3 days. He watched as the small man in dark clothing mounted his horse and rode away, realizing that he had just bought himself 3 days and a blank entry in the ledger. He realized something else as well. Dong Pao had not come of his own free will. Dong Pao had come because a man named Wei Chang-min had ordered him to. And then he recalled the words of the manager of the Sheng household, that the Lei clan's ledger had been sold to a third party. He looked back 4 days in the book. There was an entry based on the words of the cart driver who had transported grain to the upper courtyard. The cart driver had casually mentioned that an old chest full of papers had been delivered to the Wei residence the day before yesterday, and that the eldest of the inner elders had personally come out into the courtyard to receive it. Chiron pored over the book until morning and pieced everything together. Wei Zhongming had bought his father's book. Wei Zhongming had sent the 5 men with the torch. Dong Pao had come here at Wei Zhongming's behest. He didn't know this man. He had never seen him even once. He had just realized that for all 39 days, he had been looking in the wrong direction. He had been fighting with his fiancée, her father, the Wei heir, and the debt collectors. During that time, his true adversary had not taken a single step himself. On the 11th day, a carriage bearing the Wei family crest drove into the courtyard. A man of about 60 stepped out, dressed in a plain gray robe without a single ornament. He surveyed the courtyard, the line of people, and the scorched wall. He said his name was Wei Zhongmin. He said he had come to return something that belonged to someone else. He placed the Lei clan's ledger on the threshold, and he made no promises. The book lay on the threshold, and Chiron did not approach it. He looked at the old man in gray and counted. Not a single line hung over Wei Changmin. Not a single one. Over the course of 11 days, Chiron had seen lines hanging over hundreds of people, over the water carrier, over Dong Pao, over everyone in the line. Nothing hung over this man, and that was more terrifying than 5 torches. A man of 60 could not have failed to make a single promise, so he must have made them in such a way that they didn't count. So he knew how. Wei Zhongmin sat down on the same rock by the well where Dong Pao had sat the day before. He said he'd bought a chest containing the Lei clan's documents from the Sheng household for 9 coins. He said he hadn't bought the book, but rather what lay beneath it. He said he didn't need the book, and that he was giving it away with no strings attached. Chiron asked what was lying beneath it. The old man replied that they were receipts. He said that for 9 years, the boy's father had been collecting not debts, but promises. He said there were 230 sheets in the chest, and that each one bore someone else's name and the number of witnesses. He said the Lei clan had gone bankrupt not because they were poor. He said that the Lei clan had gone bankrupt because it had been collecting the wrong things. Chiron stood there, holding on to the jamb of the new wall. He looked at the old man and realized that the old man had just told him 2 things at once. The first was about his father. The second was about himself. Wei Zhongmin spoke calmly and did not look at him. He said that there were 4 powers in the city: 8 merchant guilds, the debt court, the Sheng house with its warehouses, and the Wei house with its people. He said that all 4 were built on the same foundation. They are built on the fact that a word in this city is worth nothing. He said that if a word were to start being worth even the slightest thing, all 4 would collapse at once. He said that the boy charges 2 coins per sheet and doesn't understand what he's doing. He said he would burn down his own house himself if it would help. He said that houses are burned down by fools like his grandnephew. He said that paper cannot be burned if it's already in 400 mines. Chiron asked why he had come then. The old man replied that he had come to see. He stood up. He said that in 29 days there would be a wedding at the Shun house, and that until the wedding, he wouldn't lay a finger on either the alley or anyone. He said this, and Chiron waited for the line. There was no line. The old man didn't say he was making a promise. He said he saw no reason to. The difference lay in 4 words, and the difference was everything. He left. Chiron picked up his father's book from the threshold, carried it into the house, and didn't open it for 2 days. He was afraid to open it. 12 days passed, and they merged into one long day. First cut. Senro began teaching him differently, focusing not on direct strikes, but on balance, and said that his strength was already that of 2 men, yet he still stood as if he were one. Second segment. The line at the gate had grown to 100 people a day, so Gu Baisheng stationed 2 men from the alley at the gate to keep order and didn't ask for permission. Third segment. Chiron divided the ledger into 3 sections: residents' promises, merchants' promises, and houses' promises. The third section was the thinnest and the most expensive. Fourth entry. By the 9th day, he began to see a pattern. The people of the upper city broke their word not because they were more wicked. They broke it because there was never any payment for it. He started a 4th notebook and wrote a single line in it: "There will be payment." Mo Gung arrived on the 10th day, walking and without his box of brushes. The old clerk sat down in the courtyard and was silent for a long time. Then he said that the registry office had closed his desk that morning. He said he had served for 41 years. He said the reason was a piece of paper. He said that someone had filed a complaint against the entry regarding the broken engagement in the Sheng family's registry. He said the complaint was about the wording: rejection due to non-compliance with regulations through no fault of the other party. He said that because of those 3 words, he had been dismissed. Chiron sat across from him, motionless. He asked who had filed the complaint. Mo Gung said that the Shun house had filed the complaint through the 8th Guild, and the 8th Guild had filed it through the debt court. He said the paperwork had passed through 4 hands in a single day. He said that's what they do when they want to ensure the guilty party isn't found. He said he'd kept the registry clean for 41 years, and that now his records would be seized and rewritten. He said this was the end, not for him, but for everyone who'd come to him over the past 40 years. Then he said the most important thing. He said he didn't blame the boy. He said he'd taken the brush himself and written the formula himself, and that no one had forced him to do it. He said that in 41 years, it was the first entry he'd ever been proud of. Chiron stared ahead and waited. The register was silent. There was neither a white line nor a golden one. There was not a single unit of strength, not a single unit of intellect, not a single unit of luck. Mo Gung hadn't made a single promise to him in all 40 days. And so his downfall was worth nothing. Chiron understood this. He understood it completely, and for the first time in his entire new life, he felt truly miserable. He sat there, staring at his hands, which had lifted a man in armor with a single hand. These hands couldn't buy a single line for the old man who had never once deceived him. The registry paid only for betrayal. So everything he'd received from scoundrels. So having a decent person by his side was a net loss. He stood up, walked out through the gate, made his way to the river, and stood there until dark. Senro found him there. The one-armed man didn't ask any questions. He only said that there was a law in the guard. He said that they give no coins for a person saved, but 3 for one caught. He said that for 12 years, half the guard had been catching people, and no one had been saving them. He said he'd left the gate precisely because of that, and not because of his hand. He said it was up to the boy to decide for himself what he served, the registry or himself. He said this and walked ahead along the shore. Chiron returned home that night, opened the fourth notebook, and wrote the second line in it. There will be no payment from Mo-gan. That means I'll have to pay. The next morning, he took his father's book and finally opened it. He read it all day long. 230 sheets from the chest were missing, but the book itself was unpacked, and in it, his father had kept track of his own payments. Chiron read it and understood what the Lei family had been doing for 9 years. His father had been buying up the hopeless promises of poor people. He paid a copper coin per sheet. He collected them, stored them, and never presented them. At the bottom of every page was the same line: a word is worth as much as the one who gave it. Chiron pored over this until evening and finally saw what he hadn't seen a month ago. The line wasn't about honor. The line was about the market. His father had been buying up promises of houses at junk prices and waiting for the price to rise. He never got to see that day. He was killed 3 years before his term was up. And a month ago, without realizing it, his son began doing exactly the same thing. On the 14th day, a document arrived from the trade union of the 8 courtyards. 2 men brought it and read it aloud at the gate so that the line of people waiting could hear. The union announced that documents written in the courtyard on Krivoy Lane would not be accepted at a single warehouse, shop, or office in the city. The union declared that any merchants caught with such a document would lose his place in the ranks. The union declared that this would take effect starting tomorrow morning. The line began to disperse at that very moment. By evening, no one remained at the gate. In a single day, his work had been reduced to nothing. Gu Baisheng arrived in the evening, sat down by the well, and said that the alley was with him. He said that the alley could do nothing, but that he was with it. It was honest, and it was useless. Seng Luo said that now they had to leave the city and that he knew 2 routes. Chiron didn't answer either of them. He sat there with his 4th notebook, counting. He had 412 empty promises. He had his father's book. He didn't have a single buyer. The Union of 8 Courtyards had just shut down his market, and they'd done it with a single sheet of paper. And then he paused in the middle of his calculations and looked at that sheet once more. 2 of them read it aloud by the gate. 2 had read it aloud, and at the bottom of the sheet stood the final line. The union undertakes to consider any objection within 10 days. Chiron read that line 3 times. The Union of 8 Courtyards had just made him a promise, with 100 people in line. The register opened the line, and the line was wider than any he had ever seen. It was not golden. It was white, and it listed the number of witnesses, 104. He looked at it and slowly began to smile, and Senro took a step back, because in 40 days he had never once seen that expression on his face. Wei Zongmin returns his father's book without a single promise and explains that the Lei clan had spent 9 years buying up other people's promises for copper coins and was destroyed precisely for that reason, not because of poverty. Mo Gung is removed from office after 41 years of service because of a formula inscribed in the first chapter, and the registry does not pay a single unit for this because the old man never made any promises to Chiron, which becomes the hero's first real blow. The trade union of the 8 Courtyards bans his papers throughout the city, and the line at the gate disappears in a single day. In the last line of the ban, the union promises to consider any objection within 10 days, and does so in front of 104 witnesses, which reveals to Chiron the most significant line of all. Chiron is left standing amid the ruins with his father's book and not a single ally. Gu Baisheng gives him the basement of his house and, overnight, moves 3 copies of the general ledger that Chiron finds a way out through Hua Daisheng, the head of the 5th courtyard, whose united household was the first to be stripped of its assets, and forms an alliance with his former enemy. He buys from Dong Pao not the promissory notes themselves, but the right to transcribe them for a single coin, because the office considers them worthless paper. The audit exposes forgery in 600 receipts from the debt office, and Dong Pao breaks his word regarding the inviolability of the audit in front of 400 witnesses. This retribution grants Chiron the 4th level of power. The debt office collapses in 9 days, and Dong Pao remains a debtor in his own ledger. Chiron gains access to the archive where his father's 230 sheets of paper are kept. The price. Tan Shihe dies in prison before his release, and Mo Gen is transferred there as well. Chiron stands over the body of the official who trusted him in a single morning and realizes that all his victories have been paid for by other people. He makes a public promise that he will not be the first to raise a hand against anyone in this city. The register records this promise as his own. Tung Wuliang approaches him personally and proposes a trade. Mo Gung, in exchange for a single phrase spoken aloud in front of witnesses, Chiron must declare the general ledger a forgery. He learns that a lie told in front of witnesses closes the registry forever, that the debt then passes to the next person, and that Tung Wuliang has been waiting for this for 20 years. Chiron agrees to come to the tax collection square, and everyone assumes he has given in. The United House schedules the transfer of the salt concession at the concession square in front of 700 witnesses. Hua Daisheng brings the association's charter, and Chiron finds a clause in it stating that the United House guarantees all obligations of all 3 parties. The night before the transfer, he sends out 17 letters. In the morning, he walks to the square alone, carrying a single book. The tax square was filled to the gray walls even before sunrise. 700 people, the same number as 23 years ago. Chiron walked through them, and they let him pass. No one said a word. He carried his father's book under his arm and nothing else. On the platform stood a table, and on the table lay the association's charter, draped with a red cord. Wei Zongmin sat on the right, dressed in plain gray. Sheng Mei Lin stood on the left, wearing travel clothes rather than a wedding gown. Wei Jiansu held the family seal, clutching it with both hands because his hands wouldn't obey him. Tung Wuliang stood by the steps, and above him hung a scroll torn in the middle. Chiron could now see where it had been torn. For 20 years, the man had kept a single promise he'd made to himself, unable to break it or fulfill it. Tung Wuliang spoke first. He said that the scribe Mo Gung was in the lower prison and alive, and that he would remain alive until noon. He said that a single phrase spoken aloud would be enough to secure his release. He said that the city's general book of promises should be declared a forgery by its compiler. He said that after that, the old man would be let out through the gate, and no one would ever touch him or the alley again. 700 people remained silent. Chiron climbed onto the platform and placed his father's book on the table next to the charter. He said he would not speak about the book. He asked that the charter be read aloud first. The manager of the United House looked at Wei Zhongmin, and the old man nodded. The charter was read aloud for a quarter of an hour. Warehouses, receipts, the salt concession, general administration. They reached Article 14. The United House guarantees all obligations of all 3 parties assumed prior to the day of the merger. The manager finished reading and lowered the scroll. Chiron turned toward the square. He said he had not come to accuse. He said he had come to present a claim under Article 14, and that the claim would be read in its entirety. He opened his father's book not at the first page, but in the middle, and began to read. He started with the small matters. He named the water carrier from Crooked Alley, to whom the Sheng house had promised a spot by the lower well 9 years ago in exchange for giving up the old one. The spot was never given. He named the widow from the fish market to whom a guard had promised to return the deposit for her net. He named the cart driver to whom the debt court had promised to write off 6 coins for transporting stone. He read evenly, without raising his voice, and stated the date and the number of witnesses. By the 12th name, a stir went through the square. People began to recognize their own cases. On the 30th entry, a man stepped out of the crowd, raised his hand, and said that this was his case and that he had been waiting 11 years. On the 50th entry, 8 hands went up at once. Chiron read for 2 hours. He read 412 records from the lower city, 70 promises that 8 courtyards had made to one another, and 91 records concerning the people of the United House. He did not mention a single amount. Everyone calculated the sums for themselves, and a steady, low rumble spread across the square, like the sound before a thunderstorm. He finished reading, closed the book, and said one thing. He said that, according to Article 14, the United House vouches for everything that had been read. He said he was not demanding money today. He said he was demanding a record. He said that if the House acknowledged the account, everything that had been read would be entered into the general ledger, and the House would become a debtor to its city, openly and on time. He said that if the House refused, it would be renouncing its own charter on the 2nd day of its existence in the presence of 700 witnesses. Wei Zongmin stood up. He was not looking at Chiron. He was looking at the square, surveying it with the eyes of a man who had spent 47 years observing people. He asked if the boy remembered their conversation by the well. Chiron said he remembered every word. The old man said he had spoken the truth back then. He said that the city's 4 powers insisted that a word was worth nothing, and that if a word began to be worth even the slightest thing, all 4 would collapse at once. He said that the boy was doing exactly that today. He asked if the boy understood that he was destroying not houses, but the order. Chiron said he understood. He said that an order in which a word is worth nothing lasts exactly until the moment it ceases to be convenient for the powerful. He said that his father had paid the price for this order for 9 years and paid with a river. He said that the old man wanted the city to remain divided and that the price for this was 1 broken life per generation. He said that he was offering a different price. He said that the city could remain divided because everyone in it will owe everyone else, and this is recorded. Wei Congming was silent for a very long time. Then he said that it was beautiful and that he would not accept it. He turned to the administrator and announced loudly and clearly that the United House would not recognize any obligations to third parties that arose prior to the unification. He announced that Article 14 applied only to the parties themselves. He declared this before 700 witnesses and knew exactly what he was doing. The curtain above the platform unfurled and closed. Retribution came quietly. Chiron barely felt it with her body. She felt it in the space around her. Hua Desheng stepped forward and declared aloud that the 5th courtyard was withdrawing from the alliance today. He said that a house that had renounced its charter on the 2nd day would also renounce any agreement. He said he would not transport grain on the word of honor of such a house. The 4th and 7th courtyards followed him out, then the 2nd. The warehouse managers began to descend from the platform one by one, avoiding eye contact with Wei Congmin. The United House had lasted less than 2 full days and crumbled not from an external blow, but from its own signature. Teng Wuliang stepped onto the first step. He said there was an hour left until noon. He said the old man in the prison was still alive. He said 1 sentence was enough. Chiron looked down at him from above and saw the entire line for the first time. He read it aloud. He said that 23 years ago, Tung Wuliang had served as a junior clerk for the Lei family and had promised Lei Huisheng to safeguard the chest of receipts until his dying day. He said that 4 years ago, that same man had his master to the river at night, but returned alone, carrying the chest out himself and selling it to the Sheng household for 9 coins. He said that the promise to keep the chest until his dying day had been fulfilled to the letter, and that was precisely why the thread of fate hanging over this man had not been severed, but had been torn. He said that for 20 years, the man had been walking around with a broken promise, waiting for someone else's reckoning because he would never have his own. The square fell silent. Tung Wuliang's expression did not change. He said that everything was true. He said that he had chosen the river himself and that to this day he considered it a duty, not a fault. Then he made his final move. He said that he stood there unarmed and that he was waiting. He said that the man whose father lay in the river had the right. He said that he would not defend himself. He said this loudly so that all 700 could hear, and Chiron fully understood the trap. He had promised the city that he would not raise his hand first. He had promised this publicly. A single blow now would break his own word before 700 witnesses, close the register forever, and pass the score on to the next holder. A man had spent 20 years building this 1 hour. Chiron stood there, feeling a strength in his hands that would have been enough to lift a cart loaded with stones. He didn't think of his father. He thought of Tan Shihe, who had died in prison for a single morning of trust. He lowered his hands. He said he wouldn't lay a finger on him. He said that the man who had killed his father would be recorded. He opened the general register to a blank page and recorded the name, the date, the circumstances, and the number of witnesses, then asked the assembly to confirm it. 700 people raised their hands. Tung Wuliang stood there looking at the page, and for the first time ever, something shifted on his face. He realized that he hadn't lost the fight. He realized that now he was on record, and that the record wouldn't be destroyed because there were 3 copies, and he didn't know where 2 of them were. The city guard took him at the steps without an order because there was no one left to give one. At that very moment, people from the lower quarter approached the square, and among them was a man missing his left arm. Sen Ro was leading an 11-year-old girl by the hand. He climbed 4 steps and no higher. He said he had not come to ask for forgiveness. He said he was ready to repeat, in front of everyone, exactly who had sent the men with the seal for the scribe and on whose orders. He named a name, named a day, and named the 2 men standing nearby. He said that after that he would leave, and that he was leaving for good. Chiron came down to him and did one thing. He took out 18 coins and gave them to the manager of the kitchen courtyard at the Shen household, who was standing in the crowd, and demanded a receipt confirming that Li Ying's mother's debt had been settled. The receipt was issued in front of everyone. Ray paid nothing for this. Sheng Luo looked at the paper, held his daughter's hand, and said nothing. He left through the south gate and was never seen in that city again. Sheng Meirin stepped forward as the crowd in the square began to disperse. Hanging over her was a 9-year-old promise that remained unfulfilled to this day. She began to speak, her voice loud and clear. She said that 9 years ago she had made a promise to a boy from the Lei clan that she would one day tell him the truth about his father. She said that she was speaking now. She said that neither she nor her father had chosen the day the engagement was broken off. She said that the day had been bought by the Wei household for 9 coins, along with a chest. She said that she had been ordered to speak loudly and to speak in front of 300 people. She said that she could have refused, but did not, and that it was her fault, not anyone else's. The line above her was closed. The promise was fulfilled. The registrar didn't pay a single coin. Chiron stood and looked at the empty space above her head, and for the first time in over 50 days, he was glad of it. He said only one thing to her. He said he was entering her words into the book as a fulfilled obligation, and that this was the only line in the book that cost no one anything. She said she was leaving for her aunt's in the mountains that very day. Wei Jiansu was the last to approach, and he came with something clenched in his fist. He opened his hand, and a silver coin lay in his palm, the very same one. He said he'd kept it for 50 days and didn't know why. Chiron didn't take it. He said the coin had been tossed in front of 300 witnesses and that only the one who'd tossed it could take it back. He said that the heir to the Wei household would now have to learn to count differently because he no longer had a home. Wei Jiansu stood there for a moment and then left with the coin in his fist. 12 days passed, and they all blended into one. First cut. Mulgun was led out of the lower prison on the third day. He could not walk on his own, so 4 men from Crooked Alley carried him. Second cut. The ledger was moved to the town hall and placed not in an office, but in the main hall by the window. A line formed at dawn, and Hua Desheng signed the first page as the senior official, first among the 7. Third scene. The debt office's receipts were rewritten in the presence of witnesses, and 600 forged documents were burned in the council courtyard, while Dong Pao watched from the general line because he, too, was now listed in the register. Fourth scene. Crooked Alley rebuilt the 4 burned-down houses in 9 days, and Gu Baisheng resigned from his position on the council, saying that he had spent 31 years counting coffins and now wanted to count planks. Wei Changmin was not put on trial. There was no basis for a trial. He sat in an empty house from which everyone had left except for 2 old servants. Chiron came to see him alone at the end of the 2nd week. The old man asked if he had come to kill him. Chiron said he had come to take notes. He placed a sheet of paper in front of him. On it were listed all the Wei family's obligations to third parties over the past 23 years, 41 lines in all. He said that the Wei family would pay off these debts for as many years as it took, and that afterward, the Wei family would be in the clear. Wei Changming read the sheet to the end. He said the boy hadn't forgiven him. Chiron said he hadn't. He said he'd written it down. For the first time ever, the old man smiled and said that now he understood what he'd been afraid of for 47 years. He said he hadn't been afraid of a rebellion. He'd been afraid of accountability. Mulgung returned to the table on the 17th day, bringing with him the same box containing 9 brushes that Chiron had picked up from the ground on the night of his arrest. He sat by the window in the council's common hall, opened the book, and recorded, first of all, the case of the woman from the fish market whose neighbor had failed to return her net for 3 years. He wrote slowly because his hands were uncooperative after his time in prison. He said that for 41 years he had been waiting for a book like this, and that he had finally received it in his 42nd year. Chiron stood nearby, watching the line at the window, and at that moment, the registry unfolded before his eyes for the last time. All the city's entries, hovering above everyone's heads, lingered for a single moment and then faded away one by one. One remained. The Lei family's account is closed. There are no outstanding obligations to the holder. The holder is alive. No heir is required. The registry is closed. He stood there, waiting to feel a sense of loss. There was no loss. Strength remained in his hands, his back, and his legs. Only his sight was gone. He looked at the people in line and saw simply people. A woman with a basket, a cart driver with a bandaged hand, a boy who had brought someone else's form on his father's behalf. Nothing hung over them, and he no longer knew which of them had lied to whom, and it turned out to be easier than he'd thought. He left the town hall and walked down the street toward the lower quarter. The road led downhill past the fish stalls and the salt shops, and it smelled of mud and burnt oil, just as it had on the first day. At home, he sat on the threshold and opened his father's book to the last page. Small, neat handwriting. At the bottom of the page, there was a single line. A word is worth as much as the one who spoke it. Chiron stared at it for a long time. Then he took a brush and added a second line in his own handwriting. And as much as the one to whom it is spoken. In the Redemption Square, before 700 witnesses, Chiron presents the United House with a claim under Article 14 of its own charter, and Wei Zhangmin publicly renounces his obligations. Afterward, 8 clans withdraw from the alliance, and the house falls apart within 2 days. Tung Wulian is exposed as his father's murderer, and attempts to coerce Chiron into striking first to intercept the bill. But instead of striking, Chiron enters it into the general register in full view of the entire square. Sheng Meilin fulfills a 9-year-old promise and reveals that the day the engagement was broken off had been purchased by the Wei House, while Sen Luo testifies and leaves the city with his ransomed daughter. The General Book of Promises becomes a municipal institution. Mo Gong returns to the table. Wei Zhangming remains to pay for each of the 41 recorded lines, and the register is closed forever, leaving Chiron with his power, but taking away his ability to see others' words. The Redemption Square was packed to the gray walls even before first light. The people stood packed tightly together and remained silent. There were 700 of them. The same number had gathered here 23 years ago when the city's 3 powers gave the Lei clan their collective word. Of those who had come today, 2 remembered that day. One sat on the platform in plain gray robes, his hands resting on his knees. The second made his way through the crowd with a book under his arm. Chiron had brought no one with him. He had brought neither a knife, nor paper, nor a witness. He carried his father's ledger and nothing else. People parted before him and closed ranks behind him. They let him pass in silence. That's how they let someone pass whose fate has already been decided, and they're just waiting for the end. A table stood on the platform. On the table, beneath a red cord, lay the association's charter. It had been written 4 days ago, and it was the only thing in the city that Chiron respected today. Wei Zhangmin sat on the right. Sheng Meilin stood on the left, wearing a travel dress rather than a wedding gown. Wei Jiansu held the family seal with both hands because he couldn't hold it with just one. At the bottom step stood a man with a torn left eyebrow. A line hung above Tung Wulian. It was torn in the middle, and Chiron now understood exactly why. For 20 years, the man had carried a word that could neither be fulfilled nor broken. Tung Wulian spoke first. He said that the scribe Mo Gong was alive and that he would remain so until noon. He said that for his release, a single phrase spoken aloud was needed. He said that the city's General Book of Promises must be declared a forgery by those who had opened it. He said that after that, the old man would be let out through the gate and that the alley would be left in peace. He said this loudly and clearly, and 700 people heard every word. Chiron climbed onto the platform. He placed his father's book on the table next to the charter and aligned it with the edge. He said he would not speak about the book. He asked that the association's charter be read aloud first. The manager looked at Wei Zhangmin. The old man nodded. It took a quarter of an hour to read the charter. The warehouses of the Sheng family, the debt court's receipts, the salt concession, general administration, and the official seal. They reached the 14th article, and the manager read it in the even tone of someone who didn't understand what he was reading. The United House guarantees all obligations of all three parties assumed prior to the day of the merger. Chiron turned toward the square. He said he had not come to accuse. He said he had come to present the account under Article 14 and that the account would be read in its entirety, down to the very last line. He did not open the book to the first page. He opened it where his father's handwriting began. He started small. He named the water carrier from Krivoy Lane, to whom the Shun House had promised a spot by the lower well 9 years ago in exchange for giving up the old one. The spot was never given. He named the widow from the fish market, to whom a guard had promised to return the deposit for her net in front of 4 witnesses. The deposit was not returned. He named the cart driver to whom the debt court had promised to write off 6 coins for transporting stone to the ridge. He read evenly. He did not raise his voice. After each name, he stated the date and the number of those standing nearby. By the 12th name, a stir went through the square. People began to recognize their own cases. At the 30th name, a man stepped out of the crowd, raised his hand, and said he had been waiting 11 years. At the 50th name, 8 people raised their hands at once. Chiron read for 2 hours. He read 412 entries from the lower city. He read 70 promises that the 8 trading courts had made to one another and broken. He read 91 records concerning the people of the United House. He did not mention a single sum. Everyone calculated the amounts for themselves, and a low, steady hum spread across the square, like the sound over water before a storm. He finished reading, closed the book, and placed his palm on it. He said that, according to Article 14, the United House vouches for everything that had just been read aloud. He said he was not demanding money today. He said he was demanding the records. He said that if the House accepted the account, everything that had been read would be entered into the general ledger, and the House would become a debtor to its city, openly and on time, and would pay for as many years as necessary. He said that if the House refused, it would renounce its own charter on the second day of its existence, and would do so in the presence of 700 witnesses. Wei Zhongmin stood up. He wasn't looking at Chiron. He was looking at the square, assessing it with the eyes of a man who had been counting people for 47 years and had never been off by more than a dozen. He asked if the boy remembered their conversation by the well in Crooked Alley. Chiron said he remembered every word. The old man said he hadn't lied back then. He said that the city stood on 4 powers and that all 4 stood on one. A word here is worth nothing. He said that if a word began to be worth even the slightest thing, all 4 would collapse at once, and they would collapse in a single year. He asked if the boy understood that what was crumbling today was not houses, but the order. Chiron said he understood. He said that this order lasts exactly as long as it suits the powerful. He said that his father had lived by this order for 9 years and paid for it with a river. He said that the old man wanted to keep the city divided, and that the price of such a balance was 1 broken life per generation. He said he was offering a different price. He said that the city would remain divided of its own accord because everyone in it would owe everyone else, and all of this would be recorded. Wei Zhongmin was silent for a long time. Then he said that it was a beautiful idea and that he would not accept it. He turned to the administrator and announced loudly and clearly that the United City would not recognize any obligations to third parties that arose prior to the unification. He declared that Article 14 applied only to the parties themselves. He knew what he was doing. He did it in full possession of his faculties and in the presence of 700 witnesses. A line formed above the platform and closed in. Retribution came quietly, and Chiron barely felt it with her body. She felt it in the square. Hua Desheng was the first to step forward. He said that the fifth courtyard was withdrawing from the alliance today and that there was only one reason. He said that a house that had renounced its charter on the second day would also renounce any transaction on the third. He said he would not transport grain on the word of such a house. The fourth and seventh followed him. Then the second. The warehouse managers descended from the platform one by one, avoiding eye contact with the old man in gray. The united house had lasted less than 2 full days and had crumbled not from a blow. It had crumbled because of its own signature. Tung Wuliang stepped onto the first step. He said there was an hour left until noon. He said the old man in the prison was still breathing. He said a single phrase was enough, and that a phrase was cheaper than any book. Chiron looked down at him and saw his line in its entirety for the first time in all those days. He spoke it aloud. He said that 23 years ago, Tung Wuliang had served as a junior clerk for the Lei clan and had promised Lei Huaishun to guard the chest of receipts until his last day. He said that 4 years ago, this man had led his master to the river at night and returned alone. He said that the man had carried the chest out himself and sold it to the Sheng household for 9 coins. He said that the promise to guard the chest until his last day had been fulfilled to the letter, and that was precisely why the line above him had not closed but had torn apart. He said that for 20 years, the man had been walking around with a broken promise, waiting for someone else's reckoning because he would never have his own. The square was silent. Tung Wulian's expression did not change. He said that everything was true. He said that he had chosen the river himself, and that to this day he considered it a duty, not a fault. Then he made his final move. He spread his arms and said that he stood there unarmed. He said that his son had the right and that he would not defend himself. He said this loudly so that all 700 could hear. Chiron fully understood the trap. He had promised the town that he would not raise his hand first, and he had promised it publicly. A single blow now would break his own word in front of 700 witnesses. The register would be closed forever, and the account would pass to the next holder. For 20 years, a man had built this one this hour and had built it with integrity. Chiron stood there and felt a strength in his hands, enough to lift a loaded cart. He did not think of his father. He thought of Tun Shihe, who had died in prison for a single morning of trust and for a single open book. He lowered his hands. He said he would not touch him. He said he was recording the name of the man who had killed his father. He opened the general register to a blank page. He wrote down the name, the date, the circumstances, and the number of witnesses. He asked the crowd to confirm it. 700 people raised their hands. Tung Wulian looked at the page, and for the first time, something shifted on his face. He hadn't lost the battle. He had been recorded. The record would not be destroyed because there were 3 copies, and he would never find 2 of them. The city guard took him at the steps without an order because there was no one left to give one. At that very moment, people from the lower quarter approached the square. Among them was a man missing his left arm below the elbow, leading an 11-year-old girl by the hand. Sen Ro climbed 4 steps and went no further. He said he had not come to ask for forgiveness. He said he was ready to repeat, in front of everyone, who had sent people with the seal for the scribe and on whose orders. He named a name. He named a day. He named the 2 who were standing nearby. He said that after that, he would leave the city and never return. Chiron came down to him and did one thing. He found the manager of the Shun household's kitchen courtyard in the crowd, gave him 18 coins, and demanded a receipt confirming that Li Ying's mother's debt had been settled. The receipt was written in front of everyone and recorded in the ledger. The registrar paid nothing for it. Shen Luo held the paper and held his daughter and didn't say a word. He left through the south gate that same day. He was never seen in that city again. Shen Meilin stepped forward just as the crowd in the square was beginning to disperse. A 9-year-old promise hung over her, and it remained unfulfilled to this day. She spoke loudly. She said that 9 years ago she had made a promise to a boy from the Lei clan. She promised that one day she would tell him the truth about his father. She said she was telling him now. She said that neither she nor her father had chosen the day the engagement was broken off. She said that the day had been bought by the Wei household for 9 coins along with a chest. She said she had been ordered to speak loudly and to speak in front of 300 people. She said she could have refused, but didn't, and that it was her fault, not anyone else's. The curtain above her closed. The promise was fulfilled. The registrar didn't pay a single coin. Chiron looked at the empty space above her head and was glad for the first time in all those days. He told her one thing. He said he was entering her words into the book as a fulfilled obligation, and that this was the only line in the book that cost no one anything. She said she was leaving for her aunts in the mountains that very day. Wei Jiansu was the last to approach. He unclenched his fist, and a silver coin lay in his palm. The very same one. He said he'd kept it for 50 days and still didn't know why. Chiron didn't take it. He said the coin had been tossed in front of 300 witnesses and that only the one who tossed it could pick it up again. He said the heir to the Wei household would have to learn to count all over again because he no longer had a home. The man stood there for a moment and then left with the coin clenched in his fist. 12 days passed, and they all blurred into one. Malgung was led out of the lower prison on the 3rd day. He could not walk on his own, so 4 men from Crooked Alley carried him in their arms. The general ledger was moved to the town hall and placed not in the office but in the common hall by the window, and Hua Desheng signed the first page as the head of the first of the 8 courtyards. The debt courtyard's receipts were rewritten in the presence of witnesses, and 600 forged documents were burned in the town hall courtyard, while Dong Pao watched the fire from the general line because now he too was listed in the register. Krivoy Lane rebuilt the 4 burned-down houses in 9 days, and Gu Baisheng resigned from his position on the council, saying that for 31 years he had been counting coffins, and that now he wanted to count planks. Wei Chengmin was not put on trial. There was no reason to put him on trial. He sat in an empty house from which everyone had left except for 2 old servants. Chiron came to see him alone at the end of the 2nd week. The old man asked if he had come to kill him. Chiron said he had come to take notes. He placed a sheet of paper in front of him. The sheet listed all of the Wei household's obligations to third parties over the past 23 years, 41 lines in total. He said the household would pay off these obligations for as many years as it took, and that afterward the household would be in the clear. Wei Chengmin read the sheet through to the end twice. He said the boy hadn't forgiven him. Chiron said he hadn't. He said he had written it down. The old man smiled for the first time and said that now he understood what he had been afraid of for 47 years. He said he hadn't been afraid of a rebellion. He had been afraid of accountability. Malgung returned to the table on the 17th day. He came back with the same box containing 9 brushes that Chiron had picked up from the ground on the night of his arrest. He sat by the window in the common room, opened the book, and first recorded the case of the woman from the fish market whose neighbor hadn't returned her net for 3 years. He wrote slowly because his hands were uncooperative after his time in prison. He said he had waited 41 years for such a book and finally received it in his 42nd. Chiron stood nearby, watching the line at the window, and at that moment the registry unfolded before his eyes one last time. All the city's entries, hovering above everyone's heads, lingered for an instant and then faded one by one. Only one remained. The Lay family's account is closed. There are no outstanding obligations to the holder. The holder is alive. No heir is required. The registry is closed. He expected to feel a sense of loss. There was no loss. Strength remained in his hands, his back, and his legs. Only his sight was gone. He looked at the people in line and saw simply people. A woman with a basket, a cart driver with a bandaged hand, a boy who had brought someone else's form on his father's behalf. Nothing hung over them. He no longer knew which of them had lied to whom, and that turned out to be easier than he'd thought all 50 days. He left the town hall and walked down the street toward the lower quarter. The road led downhill past the fish stalls and the salt shops. It smelled of mud and burnt oil, just like on the first day. At home, he sat down on the threshold and opened his father's book to the last page. Small, neat handwriting. A single line at the bottom. A word is worth as much as the one who gave it. Chiron stared at it for a long time. Then he took a brush and added a second line in his own handwriting. And as much as the one to whom it is spoken is worth. In the Redemption Square, before 700 witnesses, Chiron presented the United House with a claim under Article 14 of its own charter. Wei Zhongmin's public renunciation of his obligations brought down the alliance in 2 days and forced 8 trading courtyards out of it. Tung Wuliang reveals himself as his father's murderer and tries to force Chiron to strike first so he can intercept the bill. But instead of striking, Chiron enters it into the general ledger, and the square confirms the entry by raising their hands. All lines are closed. Mo Gung returns to the table. Senluo leaves with his ransomed daughter. Mei Rin fulfills a 9-year-old promise. Wei Zhongmin remains to pay for each of the 41 recorded lines. The register closes forever, leaving Chiron with his power, but taking away his ability to see others' words. His father's book lay on the threshold until dark, and Chiron never carried it into the house that evening. He carried it in only toward morning, when it began to rain. A year has passed since that rain. During that year, not a single commandant changed in the city, not a single new house was built in the upper quarter, and not a single war broke out between the courtyards. Something else happened, and it happened quietly. A word in this city began to be worth money. The communal Book of Promises lay in the town hall's main chamber by the second window. The table was positioned so that the light fell from the left, and Mo Gung chose this spot himself, spending half a day making his selection. The line began at 6 o'clock and by noon had reached the corner of the square. People did not bring complaints. People brought words. Who had promised? What had been promised? When? And most importantly, who had been standing nearby? 2 copper coins were charged per entry, and both went to the clerk. Chiron didn't take a single copper coin from the book all year. He came every morning, sat down at the third window at a separate table, and worked until dark. He no longer saw a single line above people's heads. The registry closed that day in the square, and closed forever. For the first few months, he caught himself looking up above the face of the person he was speaking with, gazing into the empty space above their shoulder. Then he stopped. Instead of sight, he was left with calculation. He learned to do with his hands what the registry had once done. He would ask a person where they had been standing. He would ask who else had been in the courtyard. He would ask how much time remained until noon or after. He would piece together 3 accounts and find a gap between them. Within a year, he was doing this faster than the registry had, and it was the only thing he was truly proud of. All his strength remained. He would lift a log that normally took 3 men to move, and he did this once a month when the alley was building something. The rest of the time, his strength lay dormant within him, like money in a buried pot. He thought about it sometimes. He thought that in 50 days, he had gathered so much strength that he could have taken this city by the throat in a single night, and that instead of the city, he'd settled for a table by the 3rd window. The problem came from where he wasn't looking. It didn't come from the clans. It came from success itself. When a word began to be worth money, a market sprang up around words. The first to realize this was a man whom the city considered finished. Dong Pao had lost his office and his home. He lived 2 streets below where he used to and stood in the general line like everyone else. And 4 months after the collapse of the debt court, he opened a shop. He bought people's written promises from them. A man had been promised 6 coins in 2 years, but he wanted to get at least something today. Dong Pao gave him 2 coins right away and took the promissory note for himself. 2 years later, he would come back for the 6. He did this legally and openly, recording every purchase in a ledger, and Mo Gung wrote everything down for him without a single objection, because there was nothing to object to. By the end of the year, Dong Pao had 400 such slips. He was rich again. He was polite again. And once more, he was at the mercy of others' deadlines, like a spider on a thread. Kyron came to his shop at the beginning of winter, sat across from him, and they talked for half an hour. Dong Pao said he hadn't broken a single word of his promise all year. He said he hadn't lied once and hadn't forged a single entry. He said that the boy had created a world in which, for the first time, it was in an old man's best interest to be honest, and that the boy would never forgive himself for it. Kyron said he had no intention of interfering. He said he had come to record one thing. He asked Dong Pao to promise aloud, in front of 3 witnesses, that he would never buy a promise from a person who did not understand what he was selling. Dong Pao looked at him for a long time. Then he promised. The entry was made that same day and became the 47th entry in the book, made on the basis of a voluntary word rather than a dispute. Kyron stepped out of the shop and realized that he had just done the same thing the registry did. He hadn't punished. He had recorded. And the entry held more sway than any fear because now 400 people read it while waiting in line every morning. The second problem was worse, and Kyron didn't see it until the 9th month. On the 8th, an entry was made in the book stating that Hua Desheng, the foreman of the 5th courtyard, had promised the carters on the northern road to raise the transport fee by 2 coins per cart. The promise was recorded with 4 witnesses, along with the date and location. Hua Desheng had made no such promise. He came to the council office, his face pale, and said that in his 29 years of service, he had never broken a promise, and that now his name appeared in the public register as that of a debtor. He said that if this remained on record, he would resign in a month because the carters were already reading about it. Mo Gung looked through his records and found the sheet. The handwriting was his own. The old man sat down, clutching the edge of the table, and insisted he hadn't written it. Kyron believed him completely, and that only made things worse. He took the sheet, held it up to the light, and studied it until evening. A year ago, a single glance upward would have been enough. Now, all he had was that piece of paper. He began to count. There were 3 copies of the book. One was at the town hall. The second was stored in Gu Baisheng's cellar. The third was kept by Hua Desheng in his courtyard, and he hadn't opened it since spring. Kyron checked all 3 in a single night. The false entry appeared only in the one at the local administration office. In the other two, that spot contained the case about the network and the neighbor from the fish market. So the page had been added later. It must have been added by someone who had access to the desk and knew the handwriting. Mo-gung said that over the course of a year, 11 people had sat at his desk. He said he'd taught 4 boys from the alley, 3 sent by the local administration, and 4 others who came on their own. Kyron didn't bother gathering everyone. He did something else instead. He announced the line that the entry regarding the transportation fee would be verified, and that 4 witnesses listed on the sheet were needed for the verification. He read the names aloud. All 4 turned out to be real people, and all 4 lived in the city. 3 of them came that same day and said they hadn't heard anything of the sort. The 4th didn't show up. The 4th was a cart driver named Pei Luan, and he hadn't come for 3 days. On the 4th day, he was found in the general line. He was standing at the very end and did not look up. Kyron took him out into the courtyard and spoke with him alone. The cart driver said he had been paid 8 coins to give his name as a witness. He said he did not know his name would be recorded in the book. He said he thought it was just an ordinary piece of paper. He named the person who had paid him and didn't hesitate for a moment. The payment had come from a junior clerk at the magistrate's office named He Ding, who was one of the 3 men sent to assist Mo-gung that spring. Kyron didn't go to see him that evening. He spent the night poring over the 2 copies, cross-checking all the entries for 9 consecutive months, and found 4 more forged pages. All 4 concerned merchants. All 4 were disadvantageous to only one person in the city, the second house. In the morning, he seized He Ding right at his desk, led him out to the square, and didn't lay a finger on him. He placed him in front of the line and asked him to repeat aloud whose orders he was carrying out. The clerk remained silent for a long time. Then he named the former manager of the Sheng family's trading courtyard, the very same man who, a year ago, had read the inventory of gifts aloud in the hall, and who, after the family's downfall, was left without a position or a name. The very same man who had come to the courtyard on Crooked Alley to offer 40 coins in exchange for omitting the entry. The man had not given up for a single day in the past year. He could not take away Kyron's power, nor could he take away the book. So he came up with a third plan. He decided to poison the book from within so that people would stop believing in it. It was clever, and it almost worked. He was arrested that same day at the Eastern Gate with 2 sacks and the money. At the trial, he spoke little. He said only one thing, and he said it to Kyron's face. He said that the book's power did not lie in the paper or the print. He said that the book's power lay in the faith of 700 people, and that faith was stronger than any wall. He said that someday, someone would finish the job. Kyron did not argue with him. He recorded his words in the book as a warning and signed them with his own hand, and this became the only entry in the book that was not anyone's promise. 20 days passed, and they merged into one. Kyron introduced a dual entry system, and each page was now written by 2 hands in 2 copies at the same time. Gu Baisheng brought 7 teenagers from the alley, and Mo-gung began teaching them from the very basics. He taught them rigorously and expelled 2 of them in the first week. Kyron traveled through 11 villages along the northern road, leaving a thin book and a person who knew how to write in each one. Hua De-sheng paid for the paper for all 11 and took no cut for himself, saying that he was doing this not out of a sense of honor, but because an honest cart driver costs 2 coins less per cart than a dishonest one. By the end of the 20th day, there were 14 books in the city instead of 3, and no one could forge all 14 at once. And at the end of that month, the district inspector arrived in town. His name was An Zilu. He was 40 years old, and he arrived with 6 men and an order from the district court. The order was brief. Any institution not provided for by the code is subject to closure. The The book is to be confiscated. The author is to be taken to the district capital for investigation. An Zilu came to the town hall himself and stood by the second window for half an hour, watching the line of people and saying nothing. Then he sat down across from Chiron and said that in 11 years of service, he had shut down 40 illegal establishments. He said that all 40 were loan sharking offices or secret guilds, and that all 40 claimed to be for the benefit of the people. He said he didn't believe a single word he would hear today, and that he had come for the paperwork, not for explanations. Chiron said he wouldn't explain. He suggested something else. He suggested that the inspector make one promise in front of witnesses and see what would happen. An Zilu asked what kind of promise. Chiron said any kind. The inspector thought for a moment and said he promised to pay his junior clerk 3 days' wages for his travel expenses by the end of the week. He said this in front of 9 witnesses, and Mo Gung recorded it in his neat, old-fashioned handwriting and added the date. An Zilu asked what would happen next. Chiron said nothing would happen next. He said that in a week, this line would either be crossed out or left open, and that everyone who came to the window would read it. He said that was the whole mechanism and that there was no other way. The inspector stayed in the city for a week and spent all 7 days walking the streets alone, without anyone else. He spoke with cart drivers and porters, with 2 courtyard foremen, and with women at the fish market. He asked the same question over and over. He asked if anything had changed over the past year. The answers varied, but almost everyone gave essentially the same response. People said that things hadn't become easier, but clearer. One woman told him that she used to be cheated and kept quiet because she was ashamed. She said that now she was cheated less often because it was no longer she who felt ashamed. On the 7th day, An Zilu paid his scribe 3 days' wages in the presence of the same 9 witnesses, and Mo Gung closed the entry and recorded its fulfillment. The auditor stared at the closed entry for a long time. Then he said something that Chiron would remember for the rest of his life. He said that in 11 years, no one had ever checked to see if he was keeping his promises. He said that for the first time in 11 years, he had paid on time, not because he remembered, but because it had been recorded. He said that he was 40 years old and that he was ashamed. He did not revoke the order. He had no right to do so. He did something else instead. He wrote an 8-page report to the county court in which he asked not to close the institution, but to recognize it and appoint a supervisor. He kept a copy of the city register for the county seat. He left at the beginning of winter and, as a farewell, said one sentence to Chiron. He said that the district court would agree because officials like things that can be counted. And he said that after that, the real work would begin. He said that as long as there was only one book in a single city, it was a miracle. He said that when there were many books, it would become a source of power. And he asked if the boy had thought about who would hold that power 20 years from now. Chiron didn't answer him. He thought about it all winter long. A year after the Redemption Square incident, the General Book of Promises operates as a municipal institution, and Chiron, deprived of the register site, has learned to detect lies through simple counting and questioning. Success gives rise to a market for promises, and Dong Pao rises again, legally buying up recorded words, after which Chiron extracts a public promise from him in lieu of a ban. The former manager of the Shun household attempts to corrupt the book with forged entries through the scribe He Ding, but Chiron uncovers the forgery by cross-checking 3 copies, after which he introduces a dual entry system and opens 14 books instead of 3. The district auditor An Zilu arrives to shut down the institution, but inspects it based on his own promise. Instead of closing, he asks that the ledger be recognized and warns that it will soon become a source of power, and that someone will hold that power 20 years from now. Winter came early that year and was dry. Chiron thought about the inspector's words all winter long and found no answer, neither by the first snowfall nor by the last. The question was simple and therefore unsolvable. He had built something that worked as long as it was held by a person who took not a single coin from it. He knew three such people in the city: himself, Mo Gen, and Tan Shi He, who died in prison and saw nothing. 3 is not a majority. 3 is a coincidence. Mo Gen gave in right away that winter. After his time in prison, he never fully recovered. He coughed all autumn, and when the frosts set in, he began to urinate half the day. He would arrive around 6 o'clock, just as he had for 42 years, sit by the second window, and work until noon. In the afternoon, he was relieved by a boy from the alley named Luo Jun. The old man never once spoke aloud of his illness. He said once that his hand was failing him and that, in 42 years, this was the first time his hand had ever failed him. He never spoke of it again. Chiron brought him his meals himself and sat beside him, and they worked in silence. Over the course of that winter, he learned more about the old man than he had in the entire previous year. He learned that Mo Gong had had a wife, that she had died in childbirth during his very first year of service, and that the child had not survived either. He learned that the old man had never remarried after that, and had lived alone for 40 years in a room with a single window. He learned that over the course of 42 years, the old man had kept records for 9 city commanders, and that not a single one of the 9 remembered his name. He asked once if the old man regretted a life spent behind someone else's lines. Mo Gong replied that he had regretted it for 20 years. He said he had stopped regretting it that morning when, in the courtyard of a ruined house, he heard Article 31 from a beggar boy. He said that over the course of 42 years, gray-haired men in silk had recited that article in his presence 3 times, and that all 3 times they had recited it to deceive. He said that the 4th time, a barefoot boy recited it to defend himself. He said that then, for the first time in 20 years, he took a different route home. In the spring, the district court sent a reply. An Zilu turned out to be right down to the last word. The institution was recognized. The book was incorporated into the code as the city's register of vows. A supervisor was appointed for the city, and An Zilu himself was appointed as that supervisor. He arrived a second time, this time not with 6 people, but with 2. Along with the recognition came a second order, and this one was dangerous. The district court ruled that the Register of Pledges, as an institution of district significance, was to be transferred to the custody of the district capital, and that the original copy of the book must be delivered there by the end of summer. An Zilu read this order aloud and then said he had warned them. He said that officials love things that can be counted, and that they love them exactly until the moment they realize that they themselves can be counted as well. He said that the original would be taken away and placed in the archives, and that the book would be opened in the archives upon request, and that the request would cost 40 coins. He said that in 2 years, everyone except those who paid 40 coins would forget about the book. He said he had seen this happen 40 times with 40 different useful endeavors. Chiron listened and counted. He wasn't counting forces or people. He was counting paper. By that spring, there were 14 books in the city and along the northern road. There were 3 copies of the complete city book, and he realized he had hit the same wall he'd been banging his head against for the entire first year. As long as there's only 1 copy, it can be taken away. He did the only thing he could do, and he did it openly. He announced to the crowd that the original would be sent to the district seat by the end of summer, as required by law, and that no one would dare argue with the law. He said that by the end of summer, the city register would be transcribed in its entirety into 20 copies, and that each copy would be sent to a separate settlement along the 2 roads. He said that the district office would receive the original and would receive it on time. He said that the original would no longer mean anything because any one of the 20 identical copies would become the original. 4 months passed, and they merged into one. First scene. In the council's main hall, 4 tables were set up instead of 2, and 11 copyists sat at them. 7 of them were teenagers from Krivoy Lane. Second scene. Hua De-sheng brought in cartloads of paper and didn't charge a single coin for it. When asked directly, he replied that paper was cheaper than a dishonest cart driver. Third scene. Luo Jun learned to keep his handwriting steady and transcribed 18 sheets a day. By July, he had surpassed even Mo Gang in speed, and the old man laughed for the first time in a year. Fourth excerpt. By August, 20 copies were ready and had been distributed to 20 villages. In each one, a man who knew how to write remained, and in each one, an order was left to recopy the documents every 3 years. The original was sent to the district capital at the end of August with An Zilu's caravan, and Chiron escorted it to the eastern gate, but did not go any further. He returned to the administrative office and sat by the third window, and on that day he realized a simple truth that had eluded him for a year. All his life he had thought he was protecting the records. He wasn't protecting the records. He was protecting people's habit of coming to the window. Mo Gang died at the end of September. He died at his desk by the second window between 6 and 7 in the morning, and he died so quietly that the people waiting in line did not notice it right away. Luo Jun came over to ask about the formula and saw that the old man was sitting upright, holding his brush and not breathing. An unfinished page lay in the book in front of him. The case was simple. A woman from the fish market whose neighbor hadn't returned her net for 3 years. It was the very same case he had recorded first when he returned from prison. The neighbor finally came himself, bringing a new net to replace the old one, and asked for the case to be closed. Mo Gang had managed to write down the name, the date, and the number of witnesses. He hadn't had time to write the last word. Chiron arrived a quarter of an hour later, stood over the table, and didn't touch anything. Then he took the old man's brush and finished writing a single word. Done. He signed his name next to the other man's unfinished line, and it was the only entry in the book made by 2 hands. The scribe was buried on the 3rd day. Chiron didn't know how many would come. More than 1,000 came. The entire crooked alley came, and the fishmongers came, and the carters from the northern road came, and 5 elders from the 8 courtyards came, with Hua De-sheng leading the way. Dong Pao came and stood at the very end, keeping his distance. An Zilu came, having traveled 2 days' journey just for this. Chiron did not say a word at the grave. He opened the book and read aloud the 7 entries written by Mo Gang's own hand over the past year. All 7 were fulfilled promises. The cart driver who returned 6 coins, the neighbor who brought the fishing net, the woman who paid off her debt for grain after 11 months. He read them evenly, without raising his voice, and 1,000 people listened, yet no one wept or cried out. This is how an accountant is buried. Autumn passed in work. No one took the seat by the second window until the snow fell, and the table stood empty, with a box holding 9 brushes lying on it. At the beginning of winter, 2 people arrived in town. A man missing his left arm below the elbow, and a 12-year-old girl. Sunro did not enter the town hall. He stopped in the square and stood there until Chiron came out himself. The one-armed man said he had no intention of returning, and that he would break that promise for only one reason. He said that his daughter had learned to write over the course of a year and a half from a monk in a mountain village, and that there was only one thing she wanted to write. He said that she had read a slim book that had been brought to their village a year ago via the northern road, and that since then she had spoken of nothing else. He said that he had brought her here, and that he himself would leave that very evening. Chiron looked at the girl. Li Yin was 12 years old, and she was holding a homemade notebook under her arm, bound with coarse thread. The notebook contained the promises made by their mountain village over the past year and a half. 74 of them, with names, dates, and the number of witnesses. The handwriting was uneven and stubborn. Chiron read her notebook while standing in the middle of the square. He read for a long time, and halfway through, he realized that his hands were trembling, something that hadn't happened to him even once since the day the registry was closed. He asked her why she had done this. She replied that no one in the village had kept track and that she was tired of listening to the adults argue about things no one remembered. He seated her at the second table that very same day. Senro left that evening through the south gate, just as he'd said. Chiron walked him to the gate, and they walked through those streets almost entirely in silence. Right at the gate, the one-armed man stopped and said one last thing. He said that in a year and a half, he hadn't been able to explain one thing to himself. He said he had betrayed the man who had taken him in from a stranger's campfire, and that an hour after the betrayal, that man had ransomed his daughter and asked for nothing in return. He said he didn't understand how that could be considered. Chiron told him that it couldn't be considered at all. He said there were things that didn't fit into any book, and that he'd spent 2 years looking for a line to describe them, but hadn't found one. He said that for this, they probably don't pay for it. Senro walked off into the darkness, and this time he didn't look back either. That winter, for the first time in 2 years, Chiron opened his father's ledger. He hadn't opened it since that night when he'd added the second entry. He sat by the window and read it again from the beginning, reading for 3 evenings. He read it now with different eyes. He didn't see an accountant who had waited 23 years. He saw a man who, for 9 years, had paid a copper coin at a time for other people's hopeless words and had never once demanded repayment for any of them. 230 pages. Not a single claim. His father wasn't buying weapons. His father was buying up other people's shame so that no one else could trade in it. Chiron sat with this thought until morning, never fully certain of it, and realized he would never be certain. You can't ask the dead. You can only finish writing their stories. In the spring, Anzilu arrived for the 3rd time, bringing news. He said that the county seat had opened a city-style registry of promises and that in the first 4 months, 2,000 people had come forward. He said that the original copy of the city's register was in storage and had never been opened. He said that this was the best thing that could have happened to it. He asked Chiron if he was finally thinking about who would be in charge of all this 20 years from now. Chiron pointed him toward the second table by the window. Sitting at the table was a 13-year-old girl, rewriting a report on a salt shipment, her back as straight as the old man's. Anzilu looked at her for a long time. Then he said that this was not the answer. He said that one person is never the answer. Chiron agreed with him. He said that the answer lay elsewhere, and that he had only understood it this winter. He said that the book did not depend on him, nor on the girl, nor on the supervision of the district court. He said that the book depended on a single habit. The people in this city were accustomed to writing down the word. He said that a habit cannot be taken away by decree, cannot be burned, and cannot be bought off for 40 coins. He said that the only thing one can do is stop supporting it, and then it will die on its own in about 10 years. He said that's why he would come to the 3rd window every morning for as many years as he could. Anzilu left that same day. Chiron returned home to Crooked Alley after dark. The house was the same, but the roof was new, and the front wall was made of light-colored planks that hadn't darkened at all in 2 years. He sat down on the threshold just as he had on that first evening and opened his father's book to the last page. Small, neat handwriting. At the bottom, the first line, "A word is worth as much as the one who gave it." Beneath it, the second, written in his own hand 2 years ago, "And as much as the one to whom it is spoken is worth."
He looked at both of them and thought that a third line needed to be added, and that the third had not been added for the second winter in a row.
He never came up with it that evening. He closed the book and sat on the threshold, listening to the alley. Behind the fence, someone promised someone else to fix a wagon by Wednesday. The district court recognizes the register of promises, but demands the original for itself, and Chiron responds not with an argument, but by transcribing the book into 20 identical copies distributed throughout the villages, so that the original loses all value. Mogung dies at his desk while working on an unfinished entry, and Chiron finishes it in his own handwriting. More than 1,000 people attend the funeral. Senro returns for a single day to bring his daughter, Li Yin, who had been keeping track of the promises herself in a mountain village for a year and a half, and she takes the old man's place by the second window. Chiron comes to the conclusion that the institution is sustained not by him or by supervision, but by people's habit of writing down their word, and that this habit must be maintained every day until the very end.